Mamma persistently using the wrong verb, or none at all. Brother and Sister Wilcox is surely the meanest. Is, Mamma? Is? Oh, please, not is, Mamma, for two or more. But they talked, and from the side of the building where I waited for the ground to open up and swallow me, I heard the soft-voiced Mrs. Flowers and the textured voice of my grandmother merging and melting. They were interrupted from time to time by giggles that must have come from Mrs. Flowers. Mamma never giggled in her life. Then she was gone. One summer afternoon, sweet milk fresh in my memory, she stopped at the store to buy provisions. Another negro woman of her health and age would have been expected to carry the paper sacks home in one hand, but Mamma said, "Sister Flowers, I'll send Bailey up to your house with these things." She smiled that slow, dragging smile. "Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. I'd prefer Marguerite, though." My name was beautiful when she said it. I'd been meaning to talk to her anyway. They gave each other age group looks. Mamma said, "Well, that's all right then. Sister, go and change your dress. You're going to Miss Sister Flowers." The chiffon robe was a maze. What on earth did one put on to go to Mrs. Flowers' house? I knew I shouldn't put on a Sunday dress. It might be sacrilegious. Certainly not a house dress, since I was already wearing a fresh one. I chose a school dress, naturally. It was formal without suggesting that going to Mrs. Flowers' house was equivalent to attending church. I trusted myself back into the store. Now, don't you look nice? I had chosen the right thing for once. "Mrs. Henderson, you make most of the children's clothes, don't you?" "Yes, ma'am. Sure do. Store-bought clothes ain't hardly worth the thread it take to stitch them." "I'd say you do a lovely job, though. So neat. That dress looks professional." Mamma was enjoying the seldom received compliments. Since everyone we knew, except Mrs. Flowers, of course, could sew competently, praise was rarely handed out for the commonly practiced craft. "I try, with the help of the Lord, Sister Flowers, to finish the inside just like I does the outside. Come here, sister." I had buttoned up the collar and tied the belt, apron-like, in back. Mamma told me to turn around. With one hand she pulled the strings and the belt felt free at both sides of my waist. Then her large hands were at my neck, opening the button loops. I was terrified. What was happening? "Take it off, sister." She had her hands on the hem of the dress. "I don't need to see the inside, Mrs. Henderson. I can tell." But the dress was over my head and my arms were stuck in the sleeves. Mamma said, "That'll do. See here, Sister Flowers. I've French seams around the armholes." Through the cloth film I saw the shadow approach. "That makes it last longer. Children these days would bust out of the sheet metal clothes. They so rough." "That is a very good job, Mrs. Henderson. You should be proud. You can put your dress back on, Marguerite." "No, ma'am. Pride is a sin, and according to the good book, it goeth before a fall." "That's right. So the Bible says. It's a good thing to keep in mind." I wouldn't look at either of them. Mamma hadn't thought that asking taking off my clothes in front of Mrs. Flowers would kill me stone dead. If I had refused, she would have thought I was trying to be womanish and might have remembered St. Louis. Mrs. Flowers had known that I would be embarrassed, and that was even worse. I picked up the groceries and went out to wait in the hot sunshine. It'd be fitting if I got a sunstroke and died before they came outside. Just dropped dead on the slanting porch. There was a little path beside the rocky road, and Mrs. Flowers walked in front swinging her arms and picking her way over the stones. She said, without turning her head to me, "I hear you're doing very good schoolwork, Marguerite, but that's all written. The teachers report that they have trouble getting you to talk in class." We passed a triangular farm on our left, and the path widened to allow us to walk together. I hung back in the separate, unmasked and unanswerable questions. "Come and walk along with me, Marguerite." I couldn't have refused even if I wanted to. She pronounced my name so nicely, or more correctly, as she spoke each word with such clarity that I was certain a foreigner who didn't understand English could have understood her. Now, no one is going to make you talk. Possibly no one can. But bear in mind, language is man's way of communicating with his fellow man, and it is language alone which separates him from the lower animals. That was a totally new idea to me, and I would need time to think about it. Your grandmother says you read a lot, every chance you get. That's good, but not good enough. Words mean more than what is set down on paper. It takes the human voice to infuse them with the shades of deeper meaning. I memorized the part about the human voice infusing words. It seemed so valid and poetic. She said she was going to give me some books, and that I not only must read them, I must read them aloud. She suggested that I try to make a sentence sound in as many different ways as possible. I'll accept no excuse if you return a book to me that has been badly handled. My imagination boggled at the punishment I would deserve if in fact I did abuse a book of Mrs. Flowers. Death would be too kind and brief. The odors in the house surprised me. Somehow I never connected Mrs. Flowers with food or eating or any other common experience of common people. There must have been an outhouse too, but my mind never recorded it. The sweet scent of vanilla had met us as she opened the door. I made tea cookies this morning. You see, I had planned to invite you for cookies and lemonade so we could have this little chat. The lemonade is in the ice box. It followed that Mrs. Flowers would have an ice on an ordinary day, when most families in our town bought ice late on Saturdays only a few times during the summer to be used in the wooden ice cream freezers. She took the bags from me and disappeared through the kitchen door. I looked around the room that I had never in my wildest fantasies imagined I would see. Brown photographs leered or threatened from the walls, and the white, freshly done curtains pushed against themselves and against the wind. I wanted to gobble up the room entire and take it to Bailey, who would help me analyze and enjoy it. Have a seat, Marguerite, over there by the table. She carried a platter covered with a tea towel. Although she warned that she hadn't tried her hand at baking sweets for some time, I was certain that, like everything else about her, the cookies would be perfect. They were flat, round wafers, slightly browned on the edges and butter yellow in the center. With the cold lemonade, they were sufficient for childhood's lifelong diet. Remembering my manners, I took nice little ladylike bites off the edges. She said that she had made them expressly for me, and that she had a few in the kitchen that I could take home to my brother. So I jammed one whole cake in my mouth, and the rough crumbs scratched the insides of my jaws, and if I hadn't had to swallow, it would have been a dream come true. As I ate, she began the first of what we later called my lessons in living. She said that I must always be intolerant of ignorance but understanding of illiteracy. That some people, unable to go to school, were more educated and even more intelligent than college professors. She encouraged me to listen carefully to what country people called mother wit, that in those homely sayings was couched the collective wisdom of generations. When I finished the cookies, she brushed off the table and brought a thick, small book from the bookcase. I had read A Tale of Two Cities and found it up to my standards as a romantic novel. She opened the first page, and I heard poetry for the first time in my life. It was the best of times and the worst of times. Her voice slid in and curved down through and over the words. She was nearly singing. I wanted to look at the pages. Were they the same that I had read? Or were there notes, music, lined on the pages, as in a hymn book? Her sounds began cascading gently. I knew from listening to 1,000 preachers that she was nearing the end of her reading, and I hadn't really heard to understand a single word. How'd you like that? It occurred to me that she expected a response. The sweet vanilla flavor was still on my tongue, and her reading was a wonder in my ears. I had to speak. I said, "Yes, ma'am." It was the least I could do, but it was the most also. There's one more thing. Take this book of poems and memorize one for me. Next time you pay me a visit, I want you to recite. I had tried often to search behind the sophistication of years for the enchantment I so easily found in those gifts. The essence escapes, but its aura remains. To be allowed, no, invited, into the private lives of strangers, and to share their joys and fears, was a chance to exchange the southern bitter wormwood for a cup of mead and with Beowulf, or a hot cup of tea and milk with Oliver Twist. When I said aloud, "It is a far, far better thing that I do than I have ever done," tears of love filled my eyes at my selflessness. On that first day I ran down the hill and into the road (few cars ever came along it), and had the good sense to stop running before I reached the store. I was liked, and what a difference it made. I was respected not as Mrs. Henderson's grandchild or Bailey's sister, but for just being Marguerite Johnson. Childhood's logic never asks to be proved. All conclusions are absolute. I didn't question why Mrs. Flowers had singled me out for attention, nor did it occur to me that Mamma might have asked her to give me a little talking to. All I cared about was that she had made tea cookies for me and read to me from her favorite book. It was enough to prove that she liked me.